Hi, my name's Rebecca Martinez. And at my engagement party last Saturday, while my sister Sophia stood in front of 80 guests with her hand on her stomach and tears streaming down her face, she looked directly at me and said, "I'm pregnant with Marcus's baby. Not congratulations on your engagement, not I'm happy for you. Just a nuclear bomb dropped in the middle of what was supposed to be the happiest night of my life." But what she didn't know was that I'd spent 8 years in military intelligence, and I could spot a lie from 3 continents away. This one was about to unravel in the next 24 hours, and I wasn't going down without a fight. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Before we dive into how I dismantled the most elaborate deception I'd ever encountered, tell me, have you ever had someone you trusted completely stab you in the back, in front of everyone you care about? Let me show you what happened when my training kicked in and the truth came to light. The evening had started like something out of a magazine. Marcus had rented the rooftop terrace at the Meridian Hotel in downtown Portland, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River. String lights hung between the pillars like suspended stars, and white roses filled every corner, their scent mixing with the crisp October air. I'd worn my grandmother's emerald earrings and a navy blue dress that Marcus had picked out himself, saying it brought out my eyes. For the first time since coming home from my second deployment, I felt like I belonged somewhere that wasn't a briefing room or a barracks. Marcus had proposed 3 months earlier during a hiking trip to Crater Lake, getting down on one knee right at sunrise, when the light hit the water just right. It was perfect, quiet, just us and the mountains. He'd planned this party as a surprise, inviting everyone from my old unit who was still stateside, my parents who'd driven up from Sacramento, his colleagues from the architecture firm, and of course family, including Sophia, my younger sister, who'd been acting strange for weeks, but I'd chalked it up to wedding stress. She'd always been dramatic. I remember standing by the champagne fountain around 9 o'clock, watching Marcus laugh with my dad about something, probably one of his terrible fishing stories. My former squad leader, Jenny Chen, had cornered me earlier to tell me how happy she was to see me settling into civilian life. "You deserve this, Becca," she'd said, squeezing my arm. "After everything we saw over there, you deserve something beautiful." I'd felt tears prick my eyes because she was right. The nightmares had finally stopped. The hypervigilance that made me check every door lock twice had faded. Marcus had been patient through all of it, never pushing, never making me feel broken. My parents seemed genuinely happy for the first time since I'd enlisted at 18. Mom kept touching the ring Marcus had chosen, a simple solitaire that caught the light when I moved my hands. Dad had already started calling Marcus son, which was significant considering he'd barely spoken to my last boyfriend. Even my aunt, Carol, who usually found something to criticize at every family gathering, had complimented the venue and asked when we were thinking about kids. The guest list was small but meaningful. Marcus's business partner, David, had flown in from Seattle with his wife. 3 of my army buddies, including Torres, who'd saved my life in Kandahar, had managed to coordinate leave. My college roommate, Sarah, came with her new husband. Everyone seemed genuinely excited for us, taking pictures, making toasts, sharing stories about how Marcus and I had met at that coffee shop near the VA office where I was getting counseling. It felt like proof that I could build something good, after everything that had tried to break me. Marcus looked incredible in his charcoal suit, the one we'd bought together for his cousin's wedding last spring. He'd been nervous all week about the speech he'd prepared, practicing it in the mirror when he thought I wasn't watching. When he finally took the microphone around 8:30, his hands were shaking slightly, but his voice was steady. He talked about how I'd taught him what real strength looked like, how proud he was to call me his fiancé, how he couldn't wait to build a life together. The applause was thunderous, and I felt my chest swell with something I hadn't experienced in years. Pure, uncomplicated joy. Sophia had been quiet most of the evening, nursing a single glass of wine and checking her phone constantly. She'd arrived late, claiming traffic, wearing a flowing black dress that seemed oddly formal for the occasion. When I'd hugged her at the door, she'd felt tense, almost brittle, but she'd smiled and said all the right things about how beautiful everything looked, how lucky I was, how happy she was for me. I'd noticed she barely ate anything during dinner and kept excusing herself to the bathroom. But Sophia had always been high maintenance about her appearance. The photographer Marcus had hired was moving through the crowd, capturing candid moments and posed family shots. I remember him asking Sophia and me to stand together for a sister photo, and she'd hesitated before stepping closer, her smile looking strained under the lights. "You look beautiful tonight," I'd told her, meaning it. Despite whatever was bothering her, she was radiant in that ethereal way she'd had since we were kids. "Thanks," she'd murmured, but her eyes didn't meet mine. Around 9:15, the DJ started playing our song, At Last, by Etta James, and Marcus led me onto the small dance floor he'd had installed. Other couples joined us, including my parents, who rarely danced anymore, and Torres with Sarah's friend who'd been flirting with him all night. The lights of the city sparkled below us, and for those 3 minutes and 28 seconds, everything felt perfect. Marcus whispered in my ear that he loved me, that he was proud of me, that he couldn't believe how lucky he was. I believed him completely. That's when Sophia asked the DJ to stop the music. She walked to the center of the dance floor like she was moving through water, her face pale but determined. The conversations died one by one as people noticed her standing there, hands clasped in front of her stomach. Marcus and I stopped dancing, his arms still around my waist, both of us looking at her with concern. "Sophia," I called out, "are you okay?" She shook her head slowly, tears already forming in her eyes. "I need to tell everyone something," she said, her voice carrying in the sudden silence. "I need to tell the truth before it's too late." The photographer lowered his camera. The bartender stopped mixing drinks. Even the traffic noise from the street below seemed to fade. "I'm pregnant," she announced, her voice breaking on the words. A few people started to clap, thinking it was good news, but she held up her hand to stop them. "I'm pregnant, and the father is Marcus." The silence that followed was deafening. I felt Marcus's arm drop from my waist like he'd been electrocuted. The room seemed to tilt sideways, and for a moment, I wondered if I was having one of my old flashbacks, if this was some kind of stress-induced hallucination. But no, this was real. Sophia was standing in front of 80 people, tears streaming down her face, claiming to be carrying my fiancé's child. "It started 6 months ago," she continued, her voice gaining strength as she destroyed my world sentence by sentence. "We tried to stop, we really did, but we couldn't help ourselves. I'm so sorry, Rebecca. I never meant for it to happen like this." She looked directly at me then, her eyes pleading for forgiveness I couldn't even begin to process. I heard my mother gasp behind me. Someone's champagne glass hit the floor and shattered. Torres stepped forward like he was ready to physically remove someone from the situation, his military instincts kicking in. But I held up my hand, stopping him, because something wasn't right. Something about Sophia's story didn't add up, and my analytical mind was already working through the inconsistencies, even as my heart felt like it was being ripped apart. 6 months ago, Marcus had been working 18-hour days on the Brennan Tower project. We'd barely seen each other except on weekends, and even then, he'd been stressed and exhausted. 6 months ago, Sophia had been dating that investment banker, Daniel, posting pictures of their weekend trips to wine country, all over social media. 6 months ago, I'd been dealing with my own issues, seeing a therapist twice a week and taking night classes to finish my degree. But more than that, something about Sophia's body language was off. I'd interrogated enough suspects to recognize when someone was performing emotion rather than feeling it. Her tears looked real, but her posture was too controlled, too calculated. She was playing a role, and she was good at it, but not good enough to fool someone who'd been trained to detect deception. Marcus was staring at her with his mouth open, his face cycling through confusion, shock, and something that looked like genuine bewilderment. "Sophia, what are you talking about?" he finally managed to say. We've never. But she was already shaking her head, cutting him off. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," she said softly. "I know you love Rebecca, but we can't keep lying about this. The baby deserves to know the truth." She placed both hands on her stomach again, a gesture that was either protective or performative. I couldn't tell which. That's when I knew for certain she was lying. Because Sophia had never been able to keep a secret in her life, not from me, not from anyone. When she'd cheated on her SATs in high school, I'd figured it out in 2 days. When she'd been sneaking out to see her boyfriend senior year, I'd caught her within a week. And when she'd been stealing money from mom's purse to buy designer clothes in college, I'd confronted her before the first credit card statement arrived. But this lie was different. This lie was sophisticated, planned, designed to cause maximum damage at the moment when I was most vulnerable. This wasn't Sophia acting on impulse or covering up a mistake. This was Sophia deliberately trying to destroy my life, and I needed to figure out why before she succeeded. The party was over, obviously. Guests were gathering their things, whispering among themselves, shooting me looks of pity and confusion. Marcus was trying to talk to Sophia, his voice low and urgent, but she was backing away from him like he was dangerous. My parents looked shell-shocked, unsure whether to comfort me or confront her. The photographer was still taking pictures, probably figuring this was the most dramatic event he'd ever captured. I stood there in my grandmother's earrings and my navy blue dress, watching my life implode in real time, and made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me break down. Instead, I was going to do what I'd been trained to do: gather intelligence, analyze the data, and neutralize the threat. Because if Sophia thought she could outsmart a combat veteran who'd spent years tracking down insurgents and uncovering terrorist networks, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. The lie was about to unravel, and I was going to be the one pulling the threads. Growing up in the Martinez household meant understanding that family loyalty was everything, at least according to our mother, Elena. She'd immigrated from Guadalajara when she was 19, pregnant with me and speaking broken English, determined to build something better for her daughters. Dad worked double shifts at the Boeing plant while Mom cleaned office buildings at night, both of them sacrificing everything, so Sophia and I could have opportunities they'd never imagined. The American dream, they called it, and for years I believed that dream included unconditional love between sisters. Sophia was born when I was 4, and from the moment she opened those dark eyes and grabbed my finger with her tiny fist, I appointed myself her protector. While other kids complained about babysitting younger siblings, I genuinely enjoyed taking care of her. I taught her to ride a bike, helped her with homework, and stood up to the bullies who made fun of her accent when she started kindergarten. Mom used to say we were like 2 halves of the same person, Rebecca the serious one and Sophia the dreamer, both of us necessary to make something whole. Throughout elementary school, I was the responsible daughter who brought home honor roll, certificates, and perfect attendance awards. I organized my backpack every night, laid out my clothes for the next day, and reminded Mom about parent-teacher conferences. Sophia was the artistic one who turned every school project into a masterpiece, who could make friends with anyone within 5 minutes, who brought home stray cats and convinced Dad to let us keep them. I loved her creativity and spontaneity, the way she could find magic in ordinary moments. She made our small house feel bigger somehow, filled with possibility. But even then, there were signs of something I didn't recognize at the time. Sophia, had a way of rewriting history when it suited her. Small things at first. If she forgot to do her chores, she'd swear she remembered Mom saying it was my turn. If she got in trouble at school, there was always an elaborate explanation about how she'd been defending someone else or misunderstood the assignment. I'd cover for her automatically, telling our parents that yes, she'd helped with dishes. Yes, she'd definitely studied for that test. It felt like protecting her, like being a good big sister. High school changed everything, though I didn't realize it at the time. I threw myself into academics and ROTC, already planning my path to the military academy. Leadership came naturally to me, whether I was organizing student council events or leading our debate team to state championships. Teachers recommended me for summer programs at West Point and Annapolis. My guidance counselor called me driven, focused, destined for success. I felt proud of the discipline I'd developed, the way I could set goals and achieve them through sheer determination. Sophia bloomed in high school like a flower finally getting enough sunlight. She joined theater, art club, and student government, becoming one of those people everyone knew and liked. Boys started noticing her, which made me protective in a way that probably embarrassed her sometimes. She'd roll her eyes when I'd grill her dates or insist on picking her up from parties by midnight. "I can take care of myself, Rebecca," she'd say, but she never seemed truly annoyed. If anything, she seemed to enjoy having someone worry about her, someone who cared enough to set boundaries. The first real crack in our relationship came during her junior year when she started dating Tyler Morrison, the quarterback who'd been suspended twice for drinking and had a reputation for treating girls like trophies. I tried to warn her gently at first, mentioning that I'd heard he wasn't serious about relationships, that maybe she deserved someone who appreciated her intelligence and creativity. But Sophia interpreted my concern as jealousy, accusing me of trying to control her life because mine was too boring to focus on. That fight lasted 3 days, longer than any argument we'd ever had. She accused me of thinking I was better than her, of always trying to be the perfect daughter while making her look bad by comparison. I was stunned because that had never been my intention. I'd always seen my achievements as something that could benefit our whole family, proof that Mom and Dad's sacrifices were worthwhile. The idea that Sophia felt diminished by my success had never occurred to me, and I didn't know how to fix it. We made up eventually, the way sisters do, but something had shifted. Sophia became more secretive about her relationships, more defensive when I tried to offer advice. She'd share details of her life with friends instead of me, posting pictures and updates on social media that I'd learn about secondhand. I told myself it was normal, that she was becoming her own person, but I missed the closeness we'd once shared. I missed being the person she turned to when things got complicated. College separated us by 3,000 miles when I went to West Point, and she stayed in California for art school. We called each other regularly at first, sharing stories about classes and roommates and the completely different worlds we were navigating. I was learning tactical strategy and weapons training while she was studying color theory and sculpture techniques. Our conversations became shorter over time, not because we loved each other less, but because our lives were diverging in ways that made shared understanding more difficult. My first deployment to Afghanistan came during Sophia's sophomore year, and something about the distance and danger seemed to reset our relationship. She wrote me letters, actual handwritten letters on expensive paper, telling me about her classes and her latest art projects, and how proud she was to have a sister serving the country. She sent care packages filled with homemade cookies and art supplies she thought I might want to share with local children. Those letters kept me grounded during some of the darkest moments overseas, reminding me that I had people worth coming home to. When I returned for my first leave, Sophia had organized a surprise party with our high school friends, complete with a banner she'd painted herself that read, "Welcome Home Hero." I was uncomfortable with the attention, still processing everything I'd seen and done, but her genuine excitement at having me back made me feel human again. She listened when I was ready to talk and gave me space when I wasn't, somehow knowing exactly what I needed without me having to explain. The pattern repeated through my second deployment and eventual transition to civilian life. Sophia would be there for the big moments, the homecomings and holidays and family celebrations, but our day-to-day relationship remained distant. She'd graduated with her MFA and was working as a freelance graphic designer, living in a studio, apartment in Portland's Pearl District, and dating a series of creative types who never seemed to last more than a few months. I was using my GI benefits to finish my bachelor's degree while working as a security consultant for tech companies, trying to figure out who I was outside of a uniform. Meeting Marcus changed everything for me, but it seemed to change something, for Sophia too. Though I couldn't identify what at the time, she'd been enthusiastic when I first told her about him, asking to see pictures and wanting to know how we'd met, what he did for work, whether I was happy. But when she finally met him at Mom's birthday dinner 6 months into our relationship, something felt off. She was charming and funny as always, but I caught her watching him when she thought no one was looking, studying him in a way that made me uncomfortable. Marcus, for his part, was polite but distant with Sophia, which I'd attributed to his natural introversion. He was always shy around new people, especially ones who commanded attention the way Sophia did. She had a gift for making herself the center of any gathering, not through arrogance but through genuine charisma and interest in others. Marcus preferred smaller groups and quieter conversations, so I figured they just operated on different wavelengths. Over the following months, as Marcus and I grew more serious, Sophia's behavior became increasingly erratic. She'd cancel plans, at the last minute, claiming work emergencies or sudden illnesses. When she did spend time with us, she'd monopolize conversations, steering them toward topics that excluded Marcus or made him uncomfortable. She'd bring up my military service in ways that felt performative, describing me as my badass sister who could kill you with her bare hands, while laughing like it was a joke. Marcus would smile politely, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. The strangest incident happened 3 months before our engagement, at a barbecue Marcus was hosting for his colleagues. Sophia had arrived uninvited, claiming she'd been in the neighborhood and thought she'd stop by. She'd had too much to drink and kept touching Marcus's arm when she talked to him, standing closer than necessary, laughing too loudly at his stories. When I pulled her aside to suggest she might want to slow down on the wine, she'd accused me of being jealous of the attention she was getting from my precious boyfriend. That night, after everyone had left and I was helping Marcus clean up, he'd asked me directly if Sophia had feelings for him. The question shocked me because it had never occurred to me as a possibility. "She's just being friendly," I'd said, but even as the words left my mouth, I wondered if I was being naive. Marcus had nodded, but I could see he wasn't entirely convinced. "She watches me sometimes," he'd said quietly, like she's trying to figure something out. I'd dismissed his concerns as overthinking, telling myself that Sophia was just protective of me in her own way, maybe testing whether Marcus was good enough for her big sister. But looking back now, with the benefit of hindsight and the devastating clarity that comes after betrayal, I could see the signs I'd missed. The way she'd ask detailed questions about our relationship, our future plans, our intimate moments. The way she'd call Marcus directly instead of going through me when she needed something. The way she'd started dressing differently when she knew she'd see him, more carefully, more seductively. 3 weeks before Marcus proposed, Sophia had called me crying, claiming she was going through a difficult breakup with Daniel, the investment banker she'd been seeing. She'd asked if she could stay with us for a few days while she figured out her next move. I'd said yes immediately, despite Marcus's visible reluctance, because that's what sisters do for each other. She'd stayed for a week, sleeping on our couch, and making elaborate breakfasts as a thank you gesture. But I'd noticed her watching Marcus again, studying him when she thought no one was looking. Now, standing in the wreckage of my engagement party with her lies still echoing in the air around us. I realized that everything I thought I knew about my sister had been carefully constructed fiction. The protective instincts I'd developed in the military were screaming that this wasn't a spontaneous confession or a moment of guilt-driven honesty. This was a calculated attack designed to destroy my happiness at the exact moment when I was most vulnerable. But Sophia had made one crucial mistake in her planning. She'd underestimated the woman I'd become during 8 years of military service, the analytical skills I'd developed through intelligence training, and the network of resources I could access when someone threatened something I valued. She thought she was dealing with the same big sister who'd always protected her, always covered for her, always put her needs first. She was about to learn that some betrayals change everything, and the person she'd tried to destroy was exactly the wrong person to underestimate. The engagement party had been Marcus's idea from the beginning, though I'd initially resisted the whole concept. After 2 combat deployments where survival meant staying invisible and drawing attention could get you killed, the thought of being the center of a celebration made my skin crawl. "We could just do dinner with our parents," I'd suggested when he first brought it up 6 weeks after the proposal. "Maybe invite Jenny and Torres. Keep it small." But Marcus had that look in his eyes, the one he got when he was designing something beautiful, already seeing the finished product in his mind. "Becca, you've spent 8 years putting everyone else first," he'd said, taking my hands across our kitchen table where we were eating takeout Chinese food and planning our future. "Your country, your unit, your family. Let me throw you a party. Let me show everyone how proud I am to be marrying you." The way he said it, with such genuine love and excitement, melted my resistance. I'd never had anyone want to celebrate me just for being me, not for my achievements or my service record, but simply because I existed, and someone loved me enough to want the world to know it. Planning the party became Marcus's obsession in the best possible way. He researched venues for weeks, driving around Portland after work to scout locations, taking pictures of rooftops and ballrooms and garden spaces. He'd bring home brochures and menus, spreading them across our coffee table like he was planning a military operation, asking my opinion on everything from appetizers to lighting. "What about this place?" he'd ask, showing me photos of some elegant hotel or trendy restaurant. "Too formal? Not formal enough?" I loved watching him work through the details, seeing how his architect's mind approached the problem of creating the perfect evening. The Meridian Hotel rooftop had been his final choice after he'd somehow convinced the manager to let us visit on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. We'd stood together at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the river and the bridge and the mountains in the distance, and I'd felt something shift in my chest. This wasn't just about a party anymore. This was about Marcus creating a moment that would mark the beginning of our life together, a memory we'd carry forward into whatever came next. "This is it," I'd said quietly, and his smile could have powered the entire building. The guest list had been more complicated than I'd expected. Marcus wanted to invite everyone from his architecture firm, his college friends, his extended family scattered across the Pacific Northwest. My list was smaller and more complicated. Military friendships are intense but geographically unstable, with people rotating between bases and deployments and civilian transitions. Some of my closest Army friends were stationed overseas or dealing with their own post-service adjustments. Jenny Chen was in San Diego finishing her PhD in engineering. Torres was in therapy 3 days a week, working through PTSD that made social events challenging. Sarah, my college roommate, was juggling her new marriage and a demanding job at a nonprofit. The family dynamics added another layer of complexity. My parents had mixed feelings about big celebrations, worried about the expense and the attention, but proud enough of my happiness to want to market properly. Dad had offered to help pay for everything, which Marcus had politely declined, saying this was something he wanted to do himself. Mom had immediately started planning her outfit and asking about flowers and music, excited to see her daughter celebrated after years of worry during my deployments. Then there was Sophia, who'd reacted to the engagement announcement with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm, calling me within hours of my text message with the news. "Oh my God, Rebecca, finally!" She'd screamed into the phone loud enough to make me hold it away from my ear. I knew he was going to propose soon. He asked me about ring styles months ago. That detail had surprised me because Marcus had never mentioned consulting Sophia, but I'd been too happy to analyze it deeply. She'd wanted to know everything about the proposal, about our plans, about whether we'd set a date. When Marcus told her about the engagement party, Sophia had insisted on helping with the planning, offering her design skills for invitations and decorations. "Let me make this beautiful for you," she'd said, and I'd been touched by her eagerness to contribute. She'd created elegant invitations on cream-colored cardstock with our names in gold script, Marcus and Rebecca's engagement celebration with a watercolor design of roses that looked professionally done. She'd also suggested the photographer, a friend of a friend who specialized in events and would give us a discount. The week before the party, Sophia had been calling daily with updates and questions. What time should hair and makeup arrive? Did I want her to coordinate with the florist about last-minute changes? Should she bring anything special to wear for the family photos? Her attention to detail had seemed sweet, sisterly, the kind of involvement I'd hoped for but hadn't expected. "I just want everything to be perfect for you," she'd said during one of our calls. "You deserve a perfect night." Looking back, I should have noticed the subtle ways she'd inserted herself into every aspect of the planning. She'd offered to pick up my dress from the dry cleaners and had kept it at her apartment for safekeeping. She'd volunteered to coordinate with the venue staff about timeline and logistics, becoming the point person for questions that should have come to Marcus or me. She'd even suggested specific songs for the playlist, including At Last by Etta James, which she claimed had always reminded her of me finding true love. The morning of the party, Sophia had arrived at our apartment at 8 a.m. with coffee and pastries, claiming she wanted to help me get ready and spend sister time before the chaos began. She'd been unusually affectionate, hugging me longer than normal, telling me how beautiful I looked, how happy she was for me. "I hope you know how much I love you," she'd said while doing my hair, her fingers gentle as she worked the curls. "No matter what happens, you're the most important person in my life." I'd been touched but also slightly puzzled by the intensity of her emotion. Sophia was affectionate by nature, but there was something almost desperate about her attention that morning, like she was memorizing me or saying goodbye. She'd taken dozens of photos of us getting ready, selfies of us doing my makeup, pictures of my dress hanging in the closet. "For your wedding scrapbook?" she'd explained, but something about her focus on capturing every moment felt excessive. Throughout the day, she'd been checking her phone constantly, more than usual, even for someone with her social media habits. When I'd asked if everything was okay, she'd claimed she was just nervous about the party going well, about everything being perfect for my special day. She'd seemed jittery, distracted, like someone working up courage for something difficult. I'd attributed it to general anxiety about social events and her desire for everything to go smoothly. The strangest moment had come in the afternoon when Marcus arrived home from his final venue walkthrough. Sophia had immediately cornered him, in the hallway, speaking too quietly for me to hear from the bedroom where I was finishing my makeup. When I'd emerged, both of them had looked tense, and Marcus had seemed unusually subdued. "Everything okay?" I'd asked, and they'd both assured me it was nothing, just last-minute party logistics. During the car ride to the venue, Sophia had been unusually quiet, staring out the window instead of chattering about the evening ahead. When I'd asked if she was feeling all right, she'd turned to me with an expression I couldn't read, something between sadness and determination. "I just want you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen," she'd said cryptically. "Sometimes, things get complicated in ways you don't expect." I'd assumed she was talking about the stress of party planning or general life drama, Even at the venue, before the guests arrived, Sophia had been acting strangely. She'd disappeared for 20 minutes, claiming she needed to check on something with the catering staff, but when I'd looked for her, no one had seen her. She'd returned looking flushed and nervous, avoiding eye contact when I'd asked where she'd been. "Just making sure everything was perfect," she'd said, but her voice had sounded hollow, rehearsed. The photographer had arrived early to capture setup photos and pre-party shots, and I'd noticed him spending an unusual amount of time talking, with Sophia, both of them whispering and checking their phones. When I'd approached to introduce myself properly, they'd separated quickly, the photographer immediately becoming professional and focused on his work. Sophia had claimed they were just discussing the shot list and timing for the evening. As guests began arriving, Sophia had transformed into her usual charming self, greeting everyone with enthusiasm and making sure drinks were flowing and conversations were starting. She'd been the perfect hostess, everything I could have wanted in a sister supporting my celebration. But I'd caught her watching Marcus throughout the evening, not in the casual way you observe someone at a party, but with the focused intensity of someone waiting for a specific moment. The final strange detail had been her outfit choice. The flowing black dress had seemed too formal and too somber for an engagement party, more appropriate for a funeral or a dramatic confrontation than a celebration. When I'd mentioned it earlier, she'd laughed and said she wanted to look sophisticated, but now I wondered if she'd chosen it specifically for the role she was planning to play. All of these details had seemed insignificant individually, quirks of personality or party stress or family dynamics. But standing in the aftermath of her devastating announcement, they formed a pattern that made my blood run cold. This hadn't been a spontaneous confession or a moment of guilty conscience. This had been planned, orchestrated, timed for maximum destruction. Sophia had spent weeks positioning herself at the center of my engagement party specifically so she could detonate it from within. The realization hit me like shrapnel. My sister hadn't just betrayed me. She'd engineered my humiliation as carefully as Marcus had engineered our celebration. And that meant everything she'd said about Marcus and the pregnancy and their supposed affair was part of a larger plan I didn't yet understand. The silence following Sophia's announcement stretched like a held breath, thick and suffocating, until someone's champagne flute finally slipped from nerveless fingers and shattered against the marble floor. The sound cracked the spell, and suddenly, everyone was moving at once, murmuring, gathering their purses, avoiding eye contact. I stood frozen in the center of it all, still wearing my grandmother's emerald earrings and my carefully chosen navy dress, watching my life disintegrate in real time while maintaining the same composed expression I'd learned during hostile interrogations. Marcus was the first to find his voice, though it came out strangled and confused. "Sophia, I don't understand what you're saying. We've never—" But she cut him off with a sob that sounded practiced, theatrical, like she'd rehearsed this moment in front of a mirror. "Please don't make this harder than it already is," she whispered, her hand protective over her supposedly pregnant belly. "I know this isn't how anyone wanted to find out, but I couldn't keep lying anymore. The baby deserves better than that." Her performance was flawless, vulnerable yet determined. The picture of a woman forced to reveal a painful truth for the sake of an innocent child. My mother was the first family member to react, her face cycling through confusion, horror, and something that looked uncomfortably like disappointment, as she looked between Sophia and me. "Rebecca, did you know about this?" she asked quietly, as if I might have been complicit in my own humiliation. The question hit like a physical blow because it revealed what I should have expected. Even my own mother's first instinct was to wonder what I'd done wrong, how I'd failed to prevent this catastrophe. Dad stood behind Mom like a statue, his weathered hands clenched into fists at his sides, the same hands that had worked double shifts to give us everything we needed. He looked older suddenly, aged by witnessing the destruction of the family unity he'd sacrificed so much to build. "This isn't possible," he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction, as if he was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. Jenny Chen stepped forward from the crowd, her expression shifting from shock to protective fury in the span of seconds. She'd served 3 deployments alongside me, had my back in firefights and interrogations, and I could see her military training kicking in as she assessed the situation. "Rebecca," she said quietly, moving to my side, "let's get you out of here." But I shook my head, knowing that leaving now would look like guilt or admission or defeat. Torres was already moving toward the exit, his PTSD making crowds and emotional, chaos unbearable, but he caught my eye before he left and gave me a subtle nod that meant we'll talk later. "I've got your 6. Sarah, my college roommate, looked like she was about to cry herself, unsure whether to comfort me or confront Sophia, settling instead for a helpless gesture of support that felt genuine but inadequate. Marcus's colleagues from the architecture firm were gathering their things with the uncomfortable efficiency of people escaping an awkward situation, whispering among themselves about the drama they'd witnessed. David, Marcus's business partner, looked stunned and kept shaking his head, like he could make the whole scene disappear through sheer disbelief. His wife was already texting someone, probably sharing the gossip before the night was even over. The photographer was still working, which struck me as obscene until I realized he was likely documenting evidence he thought he might need later. The camera clicked steadily as he captured reaction shots, tear-streaked faces, the scattered remnants of what was supposed to be a celebration. Part of me wanted to tell him to stop, but another part recognized that documentation might be important if this situation escalated further. Sophia seemed to grow more confident as she watched the chaos unfold, feeding off the attention and drama like she always had. She accepted comfort from guests who approached her with sympathy, playing the role of the conflicted other woman who'd finally found the courage to tell the truth. "I never wanted it to happen this way," she kept repeating, each iteration slightly different but equally convincing. Marcus looked genuinely bewildered, running his hands through his hair and shaking his head repeatedly. "Rebecca, you have to. Believe me, I've never touched your sister. I've barely spoken to her alone. This is insane." His distress seemed authentic, but I'd learned not to trust first impressions when people were under pressure. Guilty parties often reacted with genuine shock when confronted, their conscious minds struggling to process what their unconscious had done. My Aunt Carol approached cautiously, her usual criticism replaced by uncomfortable pity. "Honey, maybe you should sit down. You look pale." Her concern felt condescending, like I was the victim of circumstances beyond my control rather than someone capable of handling a crisis. The assumption that I needed protection or couldn't manage my own situation grated against every instinct I'd developed during military service. The venue staff were trying to maintain professionalism while clearly wanting everyone gone as quickly as possible. The manager approached Marcus discreetly, probably asking about payment and cleanup, adding a layer of practical humiliation to the emotional devastation. The bartender had stopped serving drinks and was quietly packing up glasses, avoiding eye contact with anyone involved in the unfolding drama. Some guests were taking pictures with their phones, despite the obviously inappropriate nature of documenting someone else's personal catastrophe. I could already imagine the social media posts, the group texts, the way this story would spread through our social circles like wildfire. "Did you hear what happened at Rebecca Martinez's engagement party?" The thought made my stomach turn, but I kept my expression neutral. Sophia's friend Emma, someone I'd known peripherally through high school, was rubbing Sophia's back and murmuring comforting words about how brave she was for telling the truth. "You did the right thing," she kept saying, as if destroying someone's life was an act of moral courage. The support Sophia was receiving from people who barely knew the situation felt orchestrated, like she'd prepared them for this moment somehow. The older guests, my parents' friends and Marcus's extended family, were leaving quickly and quietly, clearly uncomfortable with the level of personal drama they'd witnessed. They nodded politely in my direction, with expressions of sympathy that felt more like relief that this wasn't happening to them. Their hasty departure made the remaining crowd feel smaller, more intimate, more invasive. Marcus kept trying to approach me, but every time he took a step in my direction, Sophia would cry harder or lean more heavily on whoever was supporting her, drawing attention back to her performance. "I'm so sorry, Rebecca," he said across the distance between us. "I don't know why she's saying this, but it's not true. You have to know it's not true." Jenny moved closer to my side, her presence steady and reassuring in the chaos. "What do you need?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying the calm authority she'd used during combat situations. It was the first time anyone had asked what I wanted, instead of telling me what I should feel or do or think about what was happening. The question crystallized something that had been building since Sophia's announcement. I didn't need rescue or comfort or explanation. I needed information. I needed to understand how this elaborate lie had been constructed and why my sister had chosen tonight, this moment, this public venue to detonate it. I needed to approach this situation the way I'd been trained to approach intelligence gathering, methodically, analytically, without emotion clouding my judgment. "I need to go home," I said finally, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I need to think." It was a strategic retreat, not a surrender, though I doubted anyone else would understand. The distinction, Marcus started to follow, but I held up my hand to stop him. "Give me some space tonight. We'll talk tomorrow when I've had time to process this." Sophia looked up from her supporter's embrace, her eyes meeting mine for the first time since her announcement. What I saw there wasn't guilt or remorse or even vindictive satisfaction. It was calculation, as if she was measuring my reaction and planning her next move. That look confirmed what I'd already begun to suspect. This wasn't over. This was just the opening move in whatever game she was playing. The crowd began to disperse more quickly once I'd announced my departure. Guests eager to escape the uncomfortable intimacy of witnessing someone else's private devastation. I walked toward the exit with Jenny at my side, my head high and my expression composed, even as I felt the weight of their stares and whispered conversations. But as I reached the elevator, I heard Sophia's voice one more time, projecting clearly across the nearly empty room. "I hope someday you can forgive me, Rebecca. I never meant for you to get hurt." The words sounded sincere to anyone listening, but I caught the subtle note of triumph underneath, the satisfaction of a plan successfully executed. That's when I knew for certain that forgiveness was the last thing on either of our minds. The ride home in Jenny's car was silent except for the hum of tires on wet pavement and the occasional buzz of my phone receiving message after message. I'd turned it face down on my lap, but the persistent vibrations felt like tiny electric shocks, each one representing another person who'd heard about the catastrophe at my engagement party. Jenny had the radio off and her windows cracked slightly, letting in the cool October air that carried the scent of rain and fallen leaves, a contrast to the suffocating atmosphere we'd left behind at the Meridian. When we pulled into my driveway, the house Marcus and I shared looked exactly the same as it had 6 hours earlier. The porch light glowing warm and welcoming, my potted mums still bright with autumn colors, but everything felt different, contaminated somehow by what had happened. Jenny walked me to the door and waited while I fumbled with keys that suddenly felt foreign in my hands. "You want me to stay?" she asked. And I almost said yes before remembering that she had her own demons to manage, her own post-service adjustments that didn't need the added burden of my family drama. "I need to be alone for a while," I told her, which was partially true. What I really needed was space to think without anyone watching my reactions or offering well-meaning advice that assumed this situation was what it appeared to be. Jenny hugged me hard, the kind of embrace that had gotten us both through bad missions overseas, and promised to call in the morning. I watched her taillights disappear down the street before finally going inside to face whatever was waiting on my phone. The first thing I noticed was the notification count: 47 missed calls, 83 text messages, and 62 social media notifications. The second thing I noticed was that most of them weren't from people offering support or asking if I was okay. They were from acquaintances, distant relatives, and social media connections who'd somehow already heard about what happened and wanted details, clarification, or just to insert themselves into the drama. The text messages ranged from genuinely concerned friends to barely disguised gossip fishing. Sarah had sent 3 increasingly worried messages asking if I was safe and whether she should come over. Torres had texted a simple, "I'm here if you need backup," with no questions or demands for explanation. But mixed in with the legitimate concern were messages that made my skin crawl. "OMG, is it true about your sister and Marcus?" And "I can't believe what I'm hearing about tonight." And "Call me back. I need the real story." The social media notifications were worse. Someone had already posted a blurry photo from the party with the caption, "When engagement parties go wrong," and tagged me in it. The image showed the moment right after Sophia's announcement, capturing my face in profile as I processed what she'd said, Marcus's expression of shock behind me, and Sophia in the center with her hand on her stomach. The post had 17 comments already, mostly from people I barely knew speculating about the situation or offering opinions about family loyalty and betrayal. Another post, this one from someone who hadn't even been at the party, shared a screenshot of a group text conversation where party guests were discussing what they'd witnessed. "Anyone know if this is actually true?" one person had written. "Sofia Martinez seems like she'd do something like this for attention," someone else had responded. "Poor Rebecca, she looked devastated," added a third. The casual dissection of my private catastrophe by people treating it like entertainment made me nauseous. The worst discovery came when I opened Instagram and found that the photographer had already uploaded a preview gallery labeled "Engagement Party Drama, October 2023. He'd captured everything: Sophia's announcement, the guests' shocked reactions, Marcus's attempts to deny her claims, my composed expression as my world fell apart, and the aftermath as people fled the venue. The photos were artistically shot and professionally edited, turning my humiliation into a visual narrative that could be shared, commented on, and screenshot for posterity. Each image told part of the story Sophia wanted told, showing her as the brave truth-teller and me as the unfortunate victim of circumstances beyond my control. The photographer had caught the exact moment she placed her hands protectively over her stomach, the tears sliding down her cheeks as she confessed her supposed affair, the sympathetic faces of guests who believed her performance. But he'd also captured details I doubted he'd meant to include. The calculation in Sophia's eyes when she thought no one was looking, the way she checked her phone right before making her announcement, the satisfied smile that flickered across her face as guests began leaving. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The comments on the photos were a mixture of sympathy, speculation, and judgment that revealed how quickly public opinion was forming around Sophia's version of events. "She's so brave for telling the truth," one person wrote. "The sister looks like she's in denial," added another. "Why would someone lie about being pregnant? She must be telling the truth," concluded a third. The assumption that pregnancy claims were inherently believable was working exactly as Sophia had calculated it would. Marcus had tried calling 11 times, each attempt logged with increasing desperation in my voicemail. The first few messages were coherent attempts to explain that he had no idea why Sophia was making these accusations, that he'd never been alone with her except for brief conversations at family gatherings, that he loved me and would never betray me. But the later messages became more frantic as he realized how the situation looked and how quickly the story was spreading through our social circles. "Rebecca, please call me back," his voice said in the most recent message. "I don't understand what's happening, but we can figure this out together. I know you might not believe me right now, but I need you to know that I've never been unfaithful to you. Not with Sophia. Not with anyone. Whatever she's planning, whatever this is about, we can handle it. The exhaustion in his voice suggested he'd been making similar calls to other people, trying to control the narrative or at least present his side of the story. My parents had called 6 times, but left only one voicemail. Mom's voice shaky and confused. "Mija, we don't understand what happened tonight. Your father and I are going to drive over to Sophia's apartment to talk to her. Call us when you get this. We love you." The message revealed their instinct to seek explanation from Sophia rather than offering me unconditional support, a pattern that had defined our family dynamics for years, but felt particularly devastating tonight. The group text with my army. Friends was the only source of genuine support without hidden agendas. Jenny had updated Torres and 3 others about the basic situation, and their responses were exactly what I needed. Offers of practical help, expressions of loyalty, and, most importantly, questions about what I wanted to do rather than assumptions about what had actually happened. "This smells like an op," Torres had written. "Too clean, too convenient. You need us to run interference while you investigate?" His military thinking aligned with my own instincts that this situation required tactical analysis rather than emotional. Response. The local news had somehow picked up the story, though I couldn't figure out how until I realized that Marcus's architecture firm had recently won a major public contract for a downtown renovation project. His professional profile made our personal drama newsworthy enough for a brief mention on the late-night entertainment segment. Portland architect's engagement party ends in shocking family revelation. The coverage was minimal but public, meaning my private humiliation was now part of the permanent record. Sophia had posted her own social media update 2 hours after the party ended, a carefully crafted statement that managed to seem both remorseful and self-serving. "Tonight was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, but sometimes the truth is more important than keeping secrets. I never wanted to hurt anyone, especially my sister who I love more than anything. I'm asking for privacy during this difficult time as I figure out how to move forward for the sake of my baby." The post had 43 likes and 22 supportive comments calling her brave and honest. What struck me most about her statement was its strategic ambiguity. She'd confirmed the pregnancy and implied the affair without providing specific details that could be challenged or verified. She'd positioned herself as the reluctant truth-teller forced into a painful confession by moral obligation, and she'd claimed to love me while simultaneously destroying my relationship and reputation in the most public way possible. It was a masterclass in manipulation disguised as vulnerability. The phone rang again, this time showing my mother's number, but I let it go to voicemail along with all the others. I wasn't ready to navigate conversations that assumed Sophia's story was true or that required me to defend Marcus's innocence when I was still processing my own doubts. Instead, I opened my laptop and began doing what I should have done immediately, investigating the claims my sister had made about carrying my fiancé's child. The first thing I searched for was the timeline Sophia had established. She'd claimed, the affair started 6 months ago, which would put conception around March if she was currently pregnant. But as I scrolled through her social media posts from that period, I found dozens of photos with her then-boyfriend Daniel, including several from a weekend trip to San Francisco in late March, where they'd stayed at an expensive hotel and visited wine country. The posts were tagged with romantic captions and couples' photos that suggested their relationship was serious and exclusive at that time. More importantly, I found posts from Marcus during the same period showing his work schedule and location. He'd been traveling frequently for the Brennan Tower project, with documented trips to Seattle, Vancouver, and Denver that coincided with the time frame when Sophia claimed their affair had begun. His Instagram showed him at construction sites, client meetings, and hotel rooms in different cities, building a timeline that made an affair logistically complicated if not impossible. But the most damning evidence against Sophia's story came from her own digital footprint. In early April, She'd posted a photo of herself in a bikini from a girls' trip to Mexico, her stomach flat and toned, with a caption about spring break recovery mode. If she'd conceived in March, as her timeline suggested, she would have been 6 to 8 weeks pregnant in that photo, likely showing at least some early signs if she was far enough along to be announcing it now in October. The mathematical inconsistencies in her story were becoming obvious, but I knew that emotional manipulation often trumped logical analysis and public opinion. Sophia was counting on people's instinct to believe pregnant women and sympathize with family members forced to reveal difficult truths. She'd calculated that the shock value of her announcement would overshadow any factual investigation, at least long enough for her lie to serve whatever purpose she had in mind. As I continued digging through digital evidence, a disturbing pattern emerged. Sophia hadn't just fabricated tonight's confession. She'd been building toward this moment for months, creating a foundation of small lies and strategic positioning that would make her accusations seem credible when she finally deployed them. Sunday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching the suffocating weight that had settled over everything since Sophia's announcement 12 hours earlier. I'd managed maybe 2 hours of restless sleep before giving up and making coffee at 5 a.m., sitting at my kitchen table surrounded by printouts of social media posts, timeline charts, and notes I'd scrawled while analyzing the digital evidence of my sister's deception. The house felt different in Marcus's absence, hollow and uncertain, like the foundation had shifted overnight. My phone had been mercifully quiet since I'd turned off all notifications around 3 in the morning, but the silence felt ominous rather than peaceful. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up to a normal Sunday, people walking dogs and collecting newspapers, oblivious to the fact that my entire life had been systematically dismantled by someone who shared my DNA and claimed to love me. The knock on my door at 7:30 startled me out of my analysis paralysis. Through the peephole, I saw my parents standing on the porch, Dad holding a box of pastries from the Mexican bakery Mom loved, both of them looking like they'd aged years overnight. I considered pretending I wasn't home, but the cowardice of hiding from my own family felt like another victory for Sophia's manipulation. "Mija," Mom said the moment I opened the door, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen from crying. "We need to talk." She pushed past me into the living room, while Dad followed more hesitantly, his usual confidence replaced by the bewildered expression of a man whose understanding of his family had been shattered. They settled onto my couch like they were visiting a funeral home, formal and uncomfortable in a space where they'd shared countless Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. "We went to see Sophia last night," Dad began without preamble, his weathered hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. "She's very upset, Rebecca. She says she's been carrying this secret for months, trying to protect everyone, but the guilt was eating her alive." The way he said it, with genuine sympathy for Sophia's supposed suffering, made my stomach clench with a familiar childhood rage at always being secondary to my sister's emotional needs. Mom leaned forward, her voice taking on the pleading tone she'd used when mediating our childhood fights. "She showed us the ultrasound pictures, baby, the doctor's appointments. She's really pregnant, and she swears the timing matches up with when she says it happened, with Marcus." The words hit like physical blows because they represented evidence I hadn't anticipated, concrete proof that would be harder to discredit than social media posts and timeline discrepancies. "She doesn't want money or anything from Marcus," Dad continued, seemingly oblivious to how his words were destroying me piece by piece. "She just felt like the baby deserved to know the truth about its father. She's planning to raise it alone, maybe move back to California where she has more support." His tone suggested this was somehow noble, Sophia sacrificing her own comfort to reveal difficult truths. I sat across from them in the chair where Marcus usually read his architecture magazines, trying to process the fact that my own parents had spent the night comforting my sister instead of supporting me through the worst betrayal of my life. "Did you ask her for proof?" I managed to say, my voice sounding foreign and hollow. "Did you question any part of her story?" Or did you just accept it because she was crying? Mom's face crumpled like I'd slapped her. Rebecca, why would she lie about something like this? What could she possibly gain from destroying her relationship with you? The question revealed how little my parents understood about Sophia's psychology, how they'd spent decades enabling her dramatic tendencies by treating every crisis as legitimate rather than examining patterns of manipulation. She gains attention, I said quietly, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. She gains sympathy. She gains control over a situation where I was finally happy and settled while she was between jobs and relationships and felt invisible. The analysis felt clinical and cold, but it was based on 28 years of observing my sister's behavior, patterns during family crises. Dad shook his head like I was being unreasonable. That's a very serious accusation, Mija. You're talking about your sister falsifying medical records, lying about a pregnancy, destroying an innocent man's reputation. Those aren't things people do for attention. His disbelief was genuine but naive, rooted in his own fundamental decency that made it impossible to comprehend the depths of manipulation some people were capable of. What about Marcus? I asked, desperate to understand how they could so easily believe he was guilty of betraying me. You've known him for 2 years. You've seen how he treats me, how committed he is to our relationship. Does this sound like something he would do? But even as I asked, I could see the doubt in their eyes, the way tragedy made people question everything they thought they knew about the people in their lives. Mom twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit she'd had for as long as I could remember. People do things when they're tempted that they never thought they were capable of, she said softly. And Sophia is very beautiful, very charming. Maybe he didn't mean for it to happen. Her willingness to imagine Marcus as weak and unfaithful, while portraying Sophia as an innocent victim, made me feel like I was drowning in quicksand. The conversation continued for another hour, my parents alternately trying to comfort me and convince me to accept Sophia's version of events. They suggested family counseling, urged me to consider forgiveness, recommended that I focus on healing rather than investigating. Every word felt like another shovel of dirt being thrown on the grave of my relationship with them, burying any hope that they would support me against Sophia's lies. When they finally left, promising to pray for our family and check on me later, I sat in the devastated silence of my living room and realized that this was Sophia's master stroke. She hadn't just destroyed my relationship with Marcus or humiliated me in front of our friends. She'd systematically isolated me from my own family by positioning herself as the vulnerable truth-teller who needed protection, and me as the denial-driven victim who couldn't accept reality. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw what happened at your party. Your sister is brave for telling the truth. Some women need to stop living in denial and face facts. The message was followed by a link to a blog post titled, When Sisters Know Best, Family Loyalty versus Romantic Delusion, that used my situation as a case study in female rivalry and self-deception. Someone had turned my private nightmare into content for strangers to consume and judge. The cruelest part was how perfectly Sophia had calculated every element of her attack. She'd chosen the engagement party because it was the moment of my greatest happiness and most public vulnerability. She'd claimed pregnancy because it was almost impossible to challenge without appearing heartless. She'd positioned the confession as moral courage rather than malicious destruction. And she'd done it all while maintaining plausible deniability, leaving room to claim she was only trying to do the right thing for an innocent child. But she'd made one critical error in her planning. She'd assumed that 8 years of military intelligence training had made me harder without making me smarter, that my emotional investment in family loyalty would override my analytical abilities. She thought she was dealing with the same big sister who had always protected her, covered for her, prioritized her needs over her own truth. She was about to discover that some betrayals don't destroy people. Sometimes they reveal exactly who someone has always been underneath the armor of love and family obligation. I picked up my phone and called Jenny Chen. When she answered on the second ring, her voice immediately alert despite the early hour, I said 4 words that would change everything. I need your help. Jenny arrived within 30 minutes, carrying a laptop bag and a thermos of coffee that smelled like the strong brew we'd survived on during our deployments in Afghanistan. She took one look at my kitchen table covered with printed screenshots and timeline charts, nodded with approval, and set up her own workstation without asking for explanation. "Talk to me," she said, opening her laptop and pulling out a notebook with the efficiency of someone preparing for a mission briefing. I walked her through everything I'd discovered in my late-night investigation, pointing out the timeline inconsistencies, the social media evidence that contradicted Sophia's claims, and the mathematical impossibilities in her pregnancy story. Jenny listened without interruption, occasionally making notes or asking for clarification about specific dates, her engineering mind processing the data with the same analytical precision she'd used to defuse IEDs overseas. "She's good," Jenny said finally, scrolling through Sophia's social media posts from the past 6 months. "This isn't amateur hour manipulation. She's been building this narrative systematically, creating breadcrumbs that would support her story if anyone bothered. To look closely enough, she pointed to a post from July where Sophia had written cryptically about making difficult choices and protecting people you love even when it hurts. But she's not as smart as she thinks she is," Jenny continued, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she accessed databases I didn't even know existed. "Military intelligence taught us how to verify stories under pressure, and pregnant women leave digital footprints that are almost impossible to fake convincingly." She pulled up medical databases, insurance records, and prescription tracking, systems with the casual efficiency of someone who'd done this type of investigation professionally. Within an hour, Jenny had uncovered information that shattered the foundation of Sophia's carefully constructed lie. The medical records showed that Sophia had indeed been to a doctor recently, but for a routine gynecological exam that included a pregnancy test with negative results. The ultrasound images she'd shown our parents were stock photos downloaded from a pregnancy information website, modified with basic photo editing software to include fabricated dates and patient information. "Your sister went to 3 different walk-in clinics in the past month," Jenny explained, showing me the insurance records on her screen. Each time requesting pregnancy tests, each time receiving negative results. But she also visited a medical supply company and purchased pregnancy test strips in bulk, probably to create fake positive results for photos. The level of premeditation was staggering, revealing that Sophia hadn't made an impulsive decision to lie about pregnancy but had spent weeks preparing evidence to support her deception. More damning was Jenny's discovery of Sophia's search history, which she'd accessed through a combination of technical skills and social engineering that reminded me why she'd been so valuable during intelligence operations. The searches revealed months of research into pregnancy symptoms, timeline calculations, and legal implications of paternity claims. She'd visited forums about false pregnancy accusations, studied cases of family manipulation, and even researched the psychological impact of public humiliation on military veterans. "She's been planning this for at least 4 months, Jenny said, printing out pages of evidence with the methodical efficiency of someone building a case file. "Look at this search from June. How to break up an engagement without looking like the bad guy. And this one from July. Can you fake pregnancy test results? She's been strategizing your destruction while pretending to help plan your engagement party." The most chilling discovery came from Sophia's deleted text messages, which Jenny had recovered using techniques she'd learned during our intelligence training. The messages revealed communication with someone named Alex, apparently a former boyfriend who'd helped her research Marcus's schedule and habits. "She's been conducting surveillance on your fiancé," Jenny explained, showing me screenshots of conversations where Sophia and Alex discussed Marcus's work patterns, his favorite restaurants, and times when he was alone and vulnerable to approach. But the messages also revealed something else. Sophia's deep resentment about my military service and the respect it had earned me within our family. "She's been planning this since you got engaged," Jenny said, reading from one particularly venomous text where Sophia complained about always being overshadowed by her perfect soldier sister, who got praise for everything while she struggled to find her place in the world. Jenny's investigation extended to Marcus as well, though she approached it with the thoroughness of someone who understood that eliminating innocent people from suspicion was as important as identifying guilty parties. His phone records, credit card statements, and work schedules provided an alibi for every date Sophia had claimed they were together. His browser history showed no searches for pregnancy information, no contact with medical professionals about prenatal care, and no communication with Sophia beyond brief, polite exchanges at family gatherings. "Your fiancé is clean," Jenny announced, after completing her analysis. "Not only is there no evidence supporting your sister's claims, but there's overwhelming evidence that he was exactly where he said he was during the entire time frame she's describing. She picked him as a target because he's trustworthy enough that people would find the accusation shocking, but not suspicious enough to demand immediate proof." The psychological profile Jenny developed of Sophia's behavior was equally revealing. She'd identified patterns of escalating manipulation dating back years, starting with small lies and attention-seeking behaviors that had gradually become more sophisticated and destructive. "She's not just lying about the pregnancy," Jenny explained. "She's created an entire alternate reality where she's the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of destruction." Jenny had also traced the photographer who'd captured the engagement party disaster, discovering that he wasn't a random freelancer Sophia had recommended, but someone she'd specifically hired to document the confrontation. His social media showed previous work creating viral content from personal dramas, suggesting that Sophia had planned not just to destroy my relationship, but to turn it into public entertainment that would maximize my humiliation. "The good news is that everything she's done leaves electronic evidence," Jenny said, organizing the printed documents into neat stacks like a prosecutor preparing for trial. "The bad news is that emotional manipulation often works better than factual evidence when it comes to public opinion. People want to believe dramatic stories, especially when they involve family betrayal and secret pregnancies." But Jenny had also discovered something that gave us a strategic advantage. Sophia's plan had required help from multiple people, creating a network of conspirators who might not realize they were part of a deliberate deception. Alex, the photographer, even some of the people who'd offered her support at the party, had been manipulated into playing roles in her elaborate performance. "She's vulnerable," Jenny concluded, leaning back in her chair with the satisfaction of someone who'd successfully completed a complex intelligence operation. "Her story only works if no one examines it closely. But once people start questioning the details, the whole thing falls apart. The question is whether you want to destroy her publicly or handle this quietly." I looked at the evidence spread. Across my kitchen table, months of careful planning and systematic deception designed to devastate my life at the moment of my greatest happiness. Sophia hadn't just lied about being pregnant with my fiancé's child. She'd orchestrated a psychological warfare campaign that had isolated me from my family, humiliated me in front of my friends, and turned my engagement party into a public spectacle of betrayal. For a moment, I felt the familiar rage that had gotten me through combat situations where survival depended on controlled aggression. But then I remembered something my commanding officer had told me during my first deployment. The most effective warfare isn't about destroying your enemy, it's about making them destroy themselves. I want her to understand exactly who she tried to manipulate, I told Jenny, my voice steady with the calm that comes from having a clear mission objective. And I want everyone who believed her lies to see the truth. Jenny smiled with the same expression she'd worn when we'd successfully completed dangerous operations overseas. "Then let's give your sister a lesson in why you don't declare war on someone with military intelligence training." By Sunday afternoon, Jenny and I had transformed my kitchen into a tactical operations center that would have impressed our former commanding officers. We'd divided Sophia's deception into target categories: the fake pregnancy evidence, the falsified timeline, the conspiracy network, and the digital manipulation campaign. Each category had its own color-coded folder, timeline, chart, and action plan for systematic exposure. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about precision demolition of a carefully constructed lie. Our first strategic move was to secure Marcus's cooperation without revealing the full scope of our investigation. I called him Sunday evening, choosing my words carefully to sound like someone still processing trauma rather than someone preparing for psychological warfare. "I need to understand what really happened," I told him, my voice deliberately fragile. "Can we meet tomorrow morning? Just the two of us somewhere. Private where we can talk honestly." Marcus's relief was audible through the phone. He'd spent the day fielding calls from his business partner, his family, and colleagues who'd heard about the engagement party disaster. "Rebecca, thank God you called. I've been going crazy thinking you might actually believe her accusations. Of course we can meet. Whatever you need, whatever questions you have, I'll answer everything." His eagerness to clear his name would make him an ideal witness when we needed someone to corroborate the timeline discrepancies. Meanwhile, Jenny was working her contacts in the intelligence community to verify Sophia's medical claims through official channels. She'd discovered that one of our former unit members, Sarah Kim, now worked as a database analyst for the state health department and had access to medical records that could definitively prove whether Sophia was actually pregnant. "It's technically not legal for civilian purposes," Jenny admitted. "But if your sister is filing false reports and manipulating medical documents, there might be grounds for an official investigation." The second phase of our operation involved documenting the conspiracy network Sophia had built to support her lies. Alex, her former boyfriend who'd helped with surveillance, had left digital footprints that connected him to the photographer and to several social media accounts that had been spreading supportive comments about Sophia's brave confession. Jenny's technical skills revealed that these accounts were mostly fake, created specifically to amplify the narrative and make it appear that public opinion supported Sophia's version of events. We also identified the people who'd genuinely been manipulated into believing Sophia's story, including our parents, several party guests, and some of her friends who'd offered emotional support. These individuals would need to be approached carefully, presented with evidence rather than accusations, and given opportunities to save face while acknowledging they'd been deceived. "The goal isn't to humiliate people for being fooled," Jenny reminded me. "It's to show them how sophisticated the deception was." Monday morning, I met Marcus at a small coffee shop in Southeast Portland, far from our usual neighborhood haunts where we might encounter people who'd heard about the engagement party drama. He looked exhausted, his usually neat appearance disheveled, his confidence replaced by the uncertainty of someone whose entire life had been questioned overnight. When I walked in, he stood immediately, his relief at seeing me so obvious that other customers glanced over with curiosity. "I brought everything I could think of," he said, sliding a folder across the table before I'd even ordered coffee. "My calendar from the past year, credit card statements, phone records, anything that might help you understand that I've never been alone with Sophia, never had any kind of relationship with her beyond basic family politeness." The desperation in his voice was genuine, but more importantly, his immediate willingness to provide documentation suggested someone with nothing to hide. I opened the folder with the careful attention of someone examining evidence rather than the emotional scrutiny of a betrayed partner. Marcus had organized everything chronologically, highlighting periods when he'd been traveling for work and providing receipts, hotel confirmations, and colleague contact information for verification. "March through June was when she claims we were having an affair," he explained, pointing to a section of his calendar filled with out-of-town meetings and project deadlines. "I was barely home except to sleep." But more valuable than his alibi was Marcus's recollection of Sophia's behavior during the engagement planning process. "She kept asking weird questions," he said, finally allowing himself to sound frustrated rather than defensive. "About my work schedule, my habits, whether I worked late at the office or came straight home. At the time, I thought she was just making conversation, maybe being protective of you, but looking back, he trailed off, realizing how his innocent responses had been used to construct a believable lie. Marcus also provided crucial information about the photographer, who he'd assumed was someone Sophia had hired as a favor to us. She insisted on using him specifically, said he was offering a discount for family, Marcus recalled. But when I tried to discuss the shot list and timeline with him directly, he said I should coordinate everything through Sophia. I thought it was just his business practice, but now it seems like they had some kind of arrangement I wasn't supposed to know about. While I was gathering Marcus's statement, Jenny was executing the next phase of our operation: controlled information, released to key individuals who could influence public opinion. She started with Torres, who had military connections throughout Portland and could quietly spread accurate information through veteran networks. People trust soldiers, Jenny explained. If Torres vouches for your character and says the pregnancy claims don't add up, other veterans will listen. Jenny had also reached out to Sarah, my college roommate, who'd been genuinely distressed by the engagement party disaster and eager to help however she could. Sarah's social media presence and connections in Portland's professional community made her an ideal vehicle for sharing factual corrections without appearing to coordinate a campaign. The key is making it look like people are independently discovering inconsistencies rather than being fed information, Jenny noted. The most delicate part of our strategy involved approaching our parents with evidence rather than accusations. Jenny had prepared a comprehensive packet of documentation that laid out the timeline discrepancies, medical record inconsistencies, and digital evidence of premeditation. Your mom and dad aren't stupid, she said. They're just operating from the assumption that daughters don't lie about pregnancy and sisters don't destroy each other deliberately. Once they see the factual evidence, their own intelligence will do the rest. By Monday evening, we'd completed the foundation phase of our operation. Marcus was fully briefed and ready to provide testimony about his whereabouts and interactions with Sophia. Torres and Sarah were beginning to share carefully crafted information that raised questions about the pregnancy timeline. Jenny's contacts were verifying medical records through official channels, and I was prepared to confront my parents with evidence that would shatter their faith in Sophia's honesty. But the most important element of our strategy was patience. Sophia's lie was complex and well-constructed, which meant dismantling it required the same methodical approach she'd used to build it. We couldn't simply announce that she was lying and expect people to believe us. We had to create a pattern of doubt, let people discover inconsistencies on their own, and provide irrefutable evidence only when they were ready to accept it. She's been playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers, Jenny observed as we reviewed our progress. But she made one crucial mistake. She challenged someone who'd been trained to win wars through superior intelligence rather than superior force. The counter-operation was ready to launch, and Sophia had no idea that her carefully planned destruction was about to become her own downfall. Tuesday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that follows a storm, and I knew it was time to execute the final phase of our operation. Jenny had spent the night coordinating with her contacts, confirming that Sarah Kim's official medical database search had found no pregnancy records for Sophia Martinez in any Oregon healthcare system. More importantly, the fake ultrasound images. Sophia had shown our parents contained metadata that revealed they'd been downloaded from a stock photography website and modified using basic editing software. The first domino fell at 8:30 a.m. when Torres posted a carefully crafted message in a private Facebook group for Portland area veterans, asking for prayers for a sister in arms dealing with family manipulation, he wrote. Sometimes the people closest to us use our loyalty against us. Military families know how to spot deception under pressure. Trust your training. Within an hour, 12 veterans had commented with similar experiences and offers of support, creating a groundswell of credibility that would be impossible for Sophia to counter. Sarah had been equally strategic in her approach, posting Instagram stories that appeared spontaneous, but were actually carefully timed to maximum impact. Sometimes when stories don't add up, it's worth asking questions, she wrote alongside a photo of herself and me from college. Real friends don't rush to judgment based on accusations. They wait for facts. Her post included a subtle timeline analysis that highlighted inconsistencies in Sophia's pregnancy claims without directly accusing her of lying. The breakthrough came at 10:15 when Jenny received confirmation from Sarah Kim that not only was there no record of Sophia being pregnant, but there were multiple negative pregnancy test results in her medical file from the past 6 months. More damning was the discovery that Sophia had visited 3 different walk-in clinics requesting pregnancy confirmations, each time becoming agitated when the tests came back negative and demanding retests. Armed with this official documentation, I called my parents and asked them to meet me at their house for an important conversation. I have information about Sophia's claims that you need to see, I told Mom, keeping my voice steady and professional rather than emotional. Please don't call her before we talk. I'll be there in an hour. The military authority in my tone must have convinced her because she agreed without the usual questions or attempts to mediate. When I arrived at their house carrying a manila folder thick with evidence, both parents were waiting in the living room with expressions of cautious concern. Dad had made coffee, and Mom had set out the good cups, the same ones she used when the priest visited or when we had serious family discussions. The formality of the setting worked in my favor, creating an atmosphere where documented facts would carry more weight than emotional appeals. Before I show you what I've discovered, I began, placing the folder on their coffee table, but not opening it yet. I need you to understand that this isn't about being right or proving a point. This is about protecting our family from someone who's willing to destroy relationships for reasons I still don't fully understand. The gravity in my voice seemed to prepare them for revelations that would be difficult to accept. I started with the timeline analysis, spreading out printed calendars and social media posts that showed Sophia's activities during the period when she claimed to be having an affair with Marcus. The evidence was overwhelming. Photos of her with Daniel in romantic settings, posts about their relationship, travel records that placed her in different cities when she claimed to be with Marcus. If she was having an affair starting in March, I explained, why was she posting love letters to her boyfriend through June? Mom's face went pale as she examined the social media screenshots, her fingers tracing over posts where Sophia had proclaimed her love for Daniel and shared intimate moments that contradicted her claims about Marcus. Maybe she was seeing both of them, Mom suggested weakly, but her voice lacked conviction. Even she could see that the timeline made Sophia's story logically impossible. The medical evidence hit harder than I'd expected. When I showed them the official documentation of Sophia's negative pregnancy tests and the metadata analysis proving her ultrasound images were fake, Dad actually stood up and walked to the window, his shoulders shaking with what might have been rage or grief. She let us comfort her, he said quietly. She cried in our arms about how hard this was, how guilty she felt. We promised to support her through the pregnancy. Mom was staring at the fake ultrasound photos with the expression of someone whose fundamental understanding of reality had shifted. She printed these out specially for us, she whispered. She said she wanted us to be the first to see the baby's first picture. The betrayal in her voice was deeper than anger, the sound of someone realizing they'd been manipulated by their own child in the cruelest possible way. But the evidence that broke them completely was Jenny's discovery of Sophia's search history and the deleted text messages revealing months of planning. When they read Sophia's complaints about being overshadowed by her perfect soldier sister and her detailed research into destroying engagements, something fundamental shifted in their perception of their younger daughter. This wasn't a mistake, Dad said, his voice hollow. This was warfare. The final piece of evidence was the photographer's contract, which Jenny had obtained through her network of contacts. The document revealed that Sophia had specifically hired him to capture dramatic family moments and had paid a premium for immediate digital delivery of photos that could be shared on social media. She'd literally choreographed the documentation of my humiliation as part of her overall strategy. While my parents processed the devastating reality of Sophia's deception, Jenny was executing the public phase of our operation. She'd prepared a comprehensive social media post that laid out the factual evidence without emotional manipulation, allowing people to draw their own conclusions about what had happened at the engagement party. The post went live simultaneously on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, tagged with enough relevant accounts to ensure maximum visibility within our social circles. "The truth about Saturday night," Jenny's post began, followed by a clear chronological presentation of evidence that demolished Sophia's claims. Medical records, timeline analyses, digital forensics, and witness statements combined to create an irrefutable case that the pregnancy and affair allegations were completely fabricated. The post ended with a simple statement: Rebecca Martinez and Marcus Thompson were victims of an elaborate deception designed to destroy their happiness. They deserve apologies, not accusations. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 30 minutes, the post had been shared 47 times and received over 200 comments, most expressing shock at the sophistication of Sophia's lie and offering support for Marcus and me. Several people who'd been at the engagement party commented with their own observations about inconsistencies they'd noticed but hadn't wanted to voice at the time. Marcus called me crying, not from sadness but from relief so profound it had overwhelmed his usual composure. "People believe us," he kept saying. "They can see what really happened." His architecture firm had already reached out to support him, and his business partner David had posted his own statement vouching for Marcus's character and professional integrity. But the most satisfying moment came when I received a call from Emma, Sophia's friend who'd comforted her at the engagement party. "Rebecca, I owe you a massive apology," she said, her voice shaking with embarrassment. "I saw Jenny's post with all the evidence, and I feel sick about how I treated you Saturday night. Sophia completely fooled all of us." By Tuesday evening, the narrative had shifted completely. Instead of being seen as the betrayed sister dealing with family trauma, I was now viewed as the victim of an unprecedented campaign of psychological manipulation. Sophia's carefully constructed web of lies had unraveled in less than 12 hours, destroyed by the same methodical approach she'd used to build it. The operation was a complete success, but as I sat in my kitchen reviewing the aftermath, I realized that victory felt different than I'd expected. I'd wanted vindication and gotten it, but the cost had been the complete destruction of my relationship with my sister and the revelation that someone I'd loved and protected my entire life was capable of sociopathic levels of manipulation. Sophia's attempt to destroy me had backfired spectacularly, but in the process, she'd destroyed herself. Wednesday morning brought an eerie calm to my house, the kind of silence that follows a controlled demolition when the dust has settled and you can finally assess what remains standing. My phone had stopped buzzing with constant notifications around midnight, the social media storm having run its course as people moved on to newer dramas. The manila folders filled with evidence still sat on my kitchen table, but they felt like relics from a war that was already becoming history. Marcus arrived at 7 a.m. carrying breakfast from our favorite bakery, the same one where we'd had our first date 2 years earlier. He looked more like himself than he had since Saturday night, the haunted expression replaced by something approaching peace. "I keep thinking I should feel angry," he said as we sat across from each other in the morning light streaming through our kitchen windows. "But mostly I just feel sorry for her. What kind of person plans something like that?" The question hung between us because neither of us had a satisfactory answer. I'd spent years studying human psychology in military contexts, learning to understand enemy motivations and predict hostile behavior, but Sophia's actions defied the usual categories of conflict. She hadn't gained anything tangible from destroying my engagement party, hadn't advanced her own interests in any measurable way. The only reward had been the temporary satisfaction of watching me suffer, and even that had backfired spectacularly. My parents had called the night before, their voices hollow with the exhaustion that comes from having your fundamental assumptions about reality overturned. "We're going to Sophia's apartment this morning," Dad had told me. "We need to understand why she did this, what we missed, how we failed her so completely that she thought this was acceptable." The guilt in his voice was heartbreaking because it revealed how thoroughly Sophia had manipulated even their response to her exposure. Jenny stopped by around 9, looking satisfied in the way that follows a successful mission completion. She'd spent the previous evening monitoring the social media aftermath and coordinating with our network to ensure the truth continued spreading faster than any attempts at damage control. "Your sister deleted all her social media accounts around midnight," she reported. "Her friend Alex has gone radio silent too. They're probably trying to figure out if they're legally vulnerable for the fraud and conspiracy." The legal implications were something I'd been considering since Sunday, but hadn't wanted to pursue while focused on proving the truth. Falsifying medical records, filing false insurance claims, and conspiring to defame someone's character were all criminal offenses that could result in serious consequences for Sophia. Part of me wanted to press charges to ensure there were official consequences for what she'd done, but another part recognized that her complete social humiliation might be punishment enough. Torres called while I was making lunch, his voice carrying the relief of someone whose friend had been vindicated after being unjustly accused. "The veteran community is rallying around you hard," he told me. "There's already talk about organizing some kind of support event, maybe a fundraiser, for military families dealing with manipulation or fraud. People are angry about what happened to you, but they're channeling it into something positive. The idea that my personal nightmare might become a catalyst for helping other people in similar situations felt like finding meaning in chaos. Military families were particularly vulnerable to emotional manipulation because of the trust and loyalty built into our culture. The assumption that family members would never deliberately harm someone serving their country. Sophia's deception had violated those sacred bonds in ways that resonated throughout the veteran community. Sarah Kim called in the afternoon with official confirmation that the state health department was investigating Sophia's misuse of medical systems and falsification of health records. "This isn't just about your situation anymore," she explained. "When someone manipulates medical databases and creates fake documentation, it threatens the integrity of the entire healthcare system. There will probably be formal charges filed within the week." The news should have felt like victory, but instead it made me sad for reasons I couldn't fully articulate. Sophia was my sister, despite everything she'd done, and watching her face legal consequences felt like watching a self-inflicted tragedy unfold. She'd had every advantage our parents could provide, every opportunity to build a meaningful life, and had chosen instead to dedicate months to destroying mine. Marcus found me sitting on our back porch that evening, looking out at the garden we'd planned together and the space where we'd imagined having our wedding reception. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, settling into the chair beside me, with the easy comfort of someone whose presence made everything better. "I'm thinking about choices," I said slowly, trying to articulate something that had been building in my mind all day. Sophia made a choice to see my happiness as her enemy instead of her inspiration. She chose destruction over construction, manipulation over honest communication, lies over difficult truths. Every step of the way, she had opportunities to choose differently. Marcus nodded, understanding the weight of what I was processing. "You chose differently," he pointed out. "You could have let her destroy us. You could have accepted everyone's assumption that her story was true. You could have responded with pure emotion instead of strategic thinking, but you chose to fight for the truth." The observation made me realize something important about the person I'd become during 8 years of military service. The discipline, analytical thinking, and strategic planning that had made me effective in combat situations had also saved my personal life when it came under attack. Sophia had underestimated not just my capabilities, but my fundamental character. assuming that family loyalty would override my commitment to truth and justice. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma, Sophia's friend who'd apologized the day before. I've been thinking about patterns I ignored over the years. She did smaller versions of this to other people, didn't she? I feel like I need to examine my own complicity in enabling her behavior. The message represented something I hadn't expected. People taking responsibility for their roles in allowing Sophia's manipulation to continue unchallenged. As Wednesday evening settled into night, I found myself thinking about forgiveness, not for Sophia's sake, but for my own peace of mind. Military service had taught me that carrying hatred was like carrying extra weight on a long march. It slowed you down without serving any tactical purpose. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or enabling or pretending that devastating betrayals were acceptable family dynamics. What it meant was refusing to let Sophia's choices define my future relationships or my capacity for trust. She'd tried to destroy my engagement because she couldn't bear to see me happy, but her failure had actually strengthened my relationship with Marcus and deepened my connections with genuine friends who'd supported me through the crisis. Her attempt to isolate me had backfired, creating a network of people who now understood exactly who I was and what I was capable of overcoming. The strangest part of the entire experience was how it had revealed aspects of my character I hadn't known existed. I'd always seen myself as someone who avoided conflict, who preferred quiet competence to dramatic confrontation. But when someone threatened what I valued most, I'd responded with the same strategic precision I'd used during military operations, proving that civilian life hadn't made me soft or naive. Marcus reached over and took my hand as we sat in the gathering darkness, both of us processing the events that had tested our relationship and ultimately made it stronger. "So what happens now?" he asked, and I knew he meant more than just the immediate aftermath of Sophia's exposure. "Now we build something beautiful," I said, squeezing his fingers and meaning every word. "We plan our wedding, we create our life together, and we refuse to let other people's dysfunction define our happiness." The engagement party Sophia had destroyed was just one night, but the relationship she'd tried to poison was going to last a lifetime. 6 months later, I stood in front of the mirror in our bedroom, adjusting the collar of my dress uniform for what would be the last time as Rebecca Martinez. In 3 hours, I'd be Rebecca Thompson, married to the man who'd stood by me through the worst betrayal of my life and emerged even stronger on the other side. The engagement party disaster felt like something that had happened to a different person, a version of myself who still believed that family loyalty was unconditional and that love could overcome deliberate destruction. The wedding venue couldn't have been more different from the Meridian Hotel rooftop where Sophia had detonated her carefully planned lie. Marcus and I had chosen a small garden ceremony at a historic house in the Pearl District, intimate and warm, with only 50 guests who genuinely cared about our happiness rather than the spectacle of our celebration. Jenny was my maid of honor, standing where Sophia should have been, her presence a reminder that the people who truly love you prove it through their actions during crises. Torres had flown in from Denver specifically for the ceremony, bringing with him 3 other members of our old unit who'd taken leave to support what they called the wedding of the decade in our veteran community. The story of how I'd exposed Sophia's deception had become legendary among military families, not because of the drama, but because of the methodical, professional way I'd defended my life against psychological warfare. My parents had arrived the night before, both of them visibly older than they'd been 6 months earlier, but somehow more authentic in their relationship with me. The revelation of Sophia's manipulation had forced them to examine their own patterns of enabling and favoritism, leading to family therapy sessions that had been painful, but ultimately healing. "We should have listened to you years ago," Mom had said during one particularly difficult conversation. "We should have seen the patterns instead of making excuses." Sophia herself was notably absent, not just from the wedding, but from Portland entirely. She'd moved back to California shortly after the legal charges were filed, citing the need for a fresh start in interviews she'd given to local media outlets that portrayed her as the victim of family rejection rather than the architect of her own downfall. The restraining order I'd obtained prevented her from contacting Marcus or me directly, but mutual acquaintances occasionally shared updates about her attempts to rebuild her reputation in Los Angeles. The criminal charges had been reduced to misdemeanor fraud after Sophia agreed to pay restitution for the medical system resources she'd wasted and complete community service focused on helping victims of family manipulation. Her attorney had negotiated a plea deal that avoided jail time but included a permanent record that would follow her into any future employment or relationships. The legal resolution felt appropriate rather than satisfying, consequences that matched the crime without destroying her entire future. Marcus looked incredible in his navy suit, the same color as the dress I'd worn to our original engagement party, a deliberate choice that reclaimed the symbolism Sophia had tried to poison. His business had thrived in the months following the scandal, partly because the public attention had showcased his integrity and professionalism in ways that traditional marketing never could have achieved. 3 major projects had come his way from clients who specifically mentioned his character during the crisis as a factor in their decision to hire him. The ceremony itself was everything the engagement party should have been: genuine, joyful, surrounded by people who celebrated our love without hidden agendas or secret resentments. Jenny's maid of honor speech brought tears to everyone's eyes as she talked about watching me fight for my truth with the same courage I'd shown in combat situations. Rebecca didn't just defend her relationship, she said. She defended the possibility that 2 people can build something beautiful together without letting other people's darkness destroy it. David, Marcus's business partner, served as best man and shared stories about how Marcus had maintained his faith in our relationship, even when the accusations seemed overwhelming. I watched him choose trust over fear, David said. He never wavered in his belief that the truth would come out, that love would win over manipulation. That's the kind of man you want building your future. The reception was held in the same garden, under string lights that reminded me of the Meridian, but felt completely different in their warmth and authenticity. Instead of posed photos and carefully curated moments, our photographer captured real laughter, genuine embraces, and the kind of candid joy that comes from knowing everyone present actually wants to be there. As Marcus and I danced to At Last by Etta James, the same song Sophia had suggested for our engagement party playlist, I realized that her attempt to taint our special moments had failed. Completely. The song belonged to us now, soundtrack to our actual beginning, rather than the dramatic ending she'd planned. Her manipulation had been designed to destroy our happiness, but instead it had taught us exactly how strong our foundation really was. The evening ended with a surprise that Jenny had coordinated with several members of our veteran community, a presentation of a scholarship fund they'd established in my name for military families dealing with psychological manipulation and domestic betrayal. Your story inspired a lot of people, Torres explained. They wanted to turn something negative into a way to help others who might face similar situations. Standing there surrounded by genuine love and support, holding my husband's hand while friends and family celebrated our actual beginning, I felt grateful for the journey that had brought us to this moment. Sophia's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also revealed the strength of my real relationships and the depth of my own character. The woman who'd stood frozen in shock at an engagement party 6 months earlier was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true family is chosen through actions rather than inherited through blood, and that the people worth keeping in your life are the ones who stand with you when standing requires courage. A year after my wedding, I find myself thinking about the question I posed at the beginning of this story. Have you ever been pushed into a corner and found your power there? Because that's exactly what happened to me on that October night when my sister tried to destroy my life in front of 80 witnesses. What she meant as my ending became my beginning, and what she designed as my destruction became my foundation for building something stronger. The scholarship fund Jenny helped establish has now assisted 43 military families dealing with various forms of domestic manipulation and betrayal. Each case is different, but the patterns are remarkably similar. Someone with training in tactics and strategy being undermined by people who exploit their loyalty and trust. The applications tell stories of service members whose partners emptied bank accounts while they were deployed, veterans whose family members spread lies about their mental health to gain custody of children, and active duty personnel whose siblings use their absence to manipulate inheritance situations. What I've learned from these stories is that military training creates both strengths and vulnerabilities in civilian relationships. We're taught to trust our unit, to assume good faith from people who claim to have our backs, and to prioritize mission success over personal comfort. These qualities make us exceptional soldiers, but sometimes naive family members, especially when dealing with people sophisticated enough to weaponize our own values against us. The most important lesson from my experience isn't about detecting lies or conducting investigations, though those skills proved invaluable. It's about understanding that not everyone who shares your DNA shares your character, and that protecting yourself from manipulation isn't selfish, it's necessary for protecting everyone who depends on your strength and stability. Marcus needed me to be strong enough to fight for our truth. My real friends needed me to model how to respond to betrayal with dignity rather than destruction. Even my parents needed me to show them what accountability looked like when someone they loved crossed unforgivable lines. Sophia's story didn't end with her exile to California, though our relationship certainly did. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that she's built a new life based on an entirely different version of events, one where she was the victim of family rejection rather than the architect of her own downfall. She's found people who believe her narrative, who see her as someone courageously starting over after being abandoned by judgmental relatives. Part of me feels sorry for anyone who gets close to her without understanding her capacity for deception, but mostly I feel relieved that her manipulation is no longer my problem to solve. The restraining order expires next month, but I won't be lifting it. Not because I fear Sophia physically, but because I've learned that some people view any opening as an opportunity to resume their attacks. The sister I loved and protected my entire life was either an illusion or someone who chose to become someone else. Either way, grieving that loss was necessary for building the life I have now. Marcus and I bought a house in Southeast Portland last spring, one with a garden where we can grow vegetables and a workshop where he can build furniture for the family. We're planning to start. Our friends tease us about being disgustingly happy, and they're right. We've built something that feels unshakable, because it survived being deliberately tested by someone who understood exactly how to hurt us most effectively. The veteran community has embraced our story as proof that military skills translate into civilian resilience, that the same strategic thinking that wins wars can protect marriages and families from domestic enemies. Torres now speaks at family readiness group meetings about recognizing manipulation tactics. Jenny consults with military family support organizations about developing resources for complex betrayal situations. I've become an accidental advocate for the idea that loyalty should be earned and maintained, not assumed and exploited. But perhaps the most valuable insight from this entire experience is understanding the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. I've forgiven Sophia in the sense that I no longer carry anger about what she did, no longer waste energy wishing things had been different. Forgiveness freed me from the burden of hatred and resentment that would have poisoned my new life. But forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation with someone who's never acknowledged wrongdoing or demonstrated genuine change. People sometimes ask if I regret exposing Sophia so thoroughly, if I wish I'd handled the situation more quietly to preserve family relationships. The answer is absolutely not. Her attack was public and calculated to cause maximum damage to my reputation and relationships. Responding with equal precision and overwhelming evidence wasn't cruelty. It was justice. And justice sometimes requires making uncomfortable truths visible to everyone who needs to understand what really happened. The question I want to leave you with isn't whether you've found power in corners, though I hope you have. It's whether you're willing to use that power to protect what matters most to you, even when using it means disappointing people who want you to stay quiet, stay small, stay loyal to those who've never been loyal to you. Because sometimes the people who try to destroy you give you exactly what you need to become who you were always meant to be. And sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to let their darkness dim your light. Have you ever discovered that your greatest strength was hidden behind your greatest betrayal? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. But before you share your story, let me tell you what happened just last week that proves this journey isn't really over. I was at the grocery store, pushing my cart through the produce section, when I heard a familiar laugh behind me. My blood went cold because I'd recognize that sound anywhere. It was Sophia's laugh, the one she used when she wanted to charm someone into believing whatever story she was telling. I turned around slowly, expecting to see my sister despite the restraining order, but instead I saw a young woman who looked remarkably like her, using the same gestures, the same head tilt, the same manipulative smile while talking to an older man who was clearly smitten. For a moment, I wondered if this was someone Sophia had taught her techniques to, or if I was just seeing patterns everywhere now. But then the woman looked directly at me, and I saw something in her eyes that was unmistakable. Recognition, calculation, and a flicker of fear. She knew exactly who I was. She'd heard my story, studied it, maybe even learned from Sophia's mistakes. And in that moment, I realized that my experience had become more than just personal vindication. It had become a playbook for recognizing and stopping manipulation before it destroys innocent people. I smiled at her, the kind of smile that says, "I see exactly what you're doing," and watched her immediately disengage from her target and disappear down another aisle. Sometimes the best defense is simply letting predators know they've been identified. The truth is, there are more people like Sophia out there than we want to admit. People who see other people's happiness as a challenge to overcome, love as a weakness to exploit, and family bonds as weapons to be used against us. But there are also more people like you and me. People who refuse to stay silent when someone tries to rewrite our reality. Your story matters. Your strength matters. And your willingness to fight for truth in a world full of beautiful lies might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to save their own life from destruction. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that you're stronger than the people who tried to break you, then I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because I share stories like this every week. Stories about ordinary people who found extraordinary strength when life pushed them to their breaking point. Don't let the people who tried to silence you win by staying silent yourself. Subscribe, share your story in the comments, and let's build a community of people who know that the truth always wins, even when it takes longer than we'd like. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. And I can't wait to hear how you turned your darkest moment into your greatest victory.